My name is Olmo Parenti. I'm a documentary filmmaker and director, and I directed 3 out of the 6 episodes of Junk. Junk is a docu-series that we've been working on for the past 6 months. It's made up of 6 episodes where we go around the world and we go see the impact of the fast fashion industry on the planet, the environment, and mostly the people. We were in Chile, Ghana, Bangladesh, Indonesia, India, and finally Italy. Well, the idea was first presented to us by the host of the show, whose name is Matteo Ward. He's been a longtime advocate for fashion workers' rights and just sustainability in general in the fashion world, but he has a background in corporate fashion. He was working at Abercrombie and Fitch up until he realized that what they were doing was not exactly what the world needed. Came up with an itinerary, and he took us to all these places to try to figure out what was broken in the system. And so, for example, in Chile and in Ghana, we went there because they're two of the biggest secondhand clothing importers in the world. And so basically, most of the textile waste that we discard in Europe and in the States gets shipped to Chile, Ghana, and a bunch of other countries in Africa, for example, where people attempt to either fix it or resell it to the communities there, but where a huge part of what gets received there is not usable anymore. And so it gets discarded once again, but without the proper tools for recycling this stuff. So a lot of it ends up, getting thrown in the ocean or in makeshift landfills where it gets burnt. And I mean, the environmental and social impact of this stuff is huge. We went to Bangladesh to document, the situation with workers' rights. 10 years ago, something pretty tragic happened, which was the collapse of the Rana Plaza, which is a building that was hosting more than 1,000 workers, and thousands of people, died in the collapse of the building. So we went there 10 years later to see if workers' rights and safety conditions had changed. We went to Indonesia to document the story and the impact of rayon, which is a textile fiber that is causing a huge deforestation in Indonesia. We went to India to follow the history and all the problems connected to it that comes with cotton and growing cotton, because a huge chunk of the cotton that we use in the Western world comes from India, and it comes at a very high price because it's not the cotton that they used to grow, hundreds of years ago. It's genetically modified cotton that is driving basically families out of business, but they're forced to use it because their regular cotton doesn't grow there anymore. And then we were in Italy to talk about FAS, or PFAS, which is a molecule that the textile world uses to make fabrics hydro-repellent, but that can be extremely toxic. And so we told a story of a factory in Italy and how that factory managed to contaminate the water for hundreds of thousands of people there, and just the political impact that had in Italy, and how much of the political world went to protect that factory versus the interests of everyday citizens. I guess the most challenging thing was, having to go to a country you know very little about, and manage to tell a very complex story in a matter of a few days. Everywhere you go, you just hear stories that, like personal, like human stories that sort of give meaning to the show, in an even deeper way compared to the environmental damage that you see. Sure, like you go to a beach in Ghana and you see it covered in clothing, it shocks you. But when you go ahead and hear the personal story of a person who makes a living, transporting those clothes or selling those clothes and doesn't really have an alternative, and they're basically trashing their place in exchange for survival, that's really what makes you feel like what you're doing is is important. The problem that we've created has become sort of a solution for people, or people have tried to take the good in the problem to sustain themselves. And so it's going to take all the intelligence we have to solve this problem. The difficulty of solving the situation that we try to tell in junk, wherever you go, is that we're damaging the environment, we're damaging the places where people live, but we've made them dependent on the issue. So, for example, a huge percentage of the people who live in Bangladesh work in the textile sector. They don't have proper rights, they don't get paid fairly, but if that was to stop suddenly one day, like to the next, if textile companies and brands stop producing their clothing in Bangladesh, that would be a problem for people. You take a place like Chile or Ghana, where the issue is they're receiving thousands of tons of secondhand clothing, a lot of which gets thrown away and ends up polluting the place where they live. But at the same time, it has become a source of income for a lot of these people. So they take our waste and they give it a new life, a new meaning. And so even saying this is 100% bad, it's complicated to say. I think we need to look at the current problem and try to find solutions that take into account that the problem we've created has also become an opportunity for some people. We need to be very careful with how we bring solutions to the table. We've lost our connection with clothing. Clothing has become something we give very little value to. As a consequence, like, this generates a number of problems, which are the problems that we see in junk. So the solution to this is reconnect with our clothing, start loving what we wear again, start taking care of it, making it last longer. Don't consider it something that we literally, as one of the people in one of the episodes says, just blow our nose with, and something that represents our identity. Is what you wear communicates to the rest of the world what you're about, who you are, and that transcends language. What I'm wearing and what somebody else is wearing will tell me something about them. If clothing equals identity, so if clothing translates our identity to other people, I think it can't change every day, right? Like, we can't change clothing that quickly, because identities don't change that quickly. Like, identities are deeply rooted inside of us, inside of our experiences, our lives. And so wearing something for a long time shows a solid identity. Buying something new like off of Shane every week and changing your clothes every week also shows that you don't really know who you are. It still communicates something about you, but not necessarily something you would want to communicate about yourself. So if I were to find an overarching solution, it's this: like, fall in love with your clothing again. Be proud to wear the same thing for a long time. Be proud to make your clothing about you and not making like you about your clothing, if it makes any sense. It's really tough to give a piece of advice to companies that they could even potentially follow, because of course the easiest thing to say would be stop thinking about profits and start thinking about working ethically. But that's just not sustainable in the economic system that we've decided to go for. I mean, as long as we're a capitalist society, you can't ask companies to stop thinking about profit, and that makes sense. What I do think is there are some smaller solutions that might not solve the problem as a whole, but that might make things better. So, for example, take-back programs are a huge thing. Imagine if every brand was forced by law to take back the clothing that they produce once the clothing is, once the person who's bought it doesn't want it anymore, doesn't need it anymore, and if they were forced to repurpose it in some way. I feel like that would, first, like, for example, help solve the problem that we have with trash and textile waste in countries like Chile and Ghana. That's something that they could do, but it tends to be not economically feasible or convenient because it's often cheaper to produce something new than it is to repurpose something that we've already made and that already exists. That has to change. Like, that is literally the definition of unsustainable. I had never heard about upcycling before I went to Ghana. I am not like a fashionista. I have very little experience with fashion. I'm a director, I'm a filmmaker, so I was hired to go and work on the show, and I'm very happy that I did. But I started making the show not knowing anything about the upcycling world. And what I like the most about it is that when you upcycle something, so when you take something and you turn it into something else, whether it's a piece of textile waste or something that you could have worn, out of the box because it's still in good enough condition, you turn it into something personal. Like, you use your inventiveness to turn it into something else. And I feel like that as a consequence, that makes you more attached to that piece of clothing. It's because it takes effort, because it takes a part of you, a part of your intellect. It's something that you're gonna care about more deeply, and that's part of the solution. It's part of what we need to do, not just with clothing, but with everything in general. We need to feel more attached, more close to what we own, and take care of it so that we're not gonna need to own more things, but we can just be happy with what we have. For people who want to make an everyday change about, their relationship with fashion, to start, just consume less. Like, when in doubt, ask yourself if you really need what you're about to buy. And I have a feeling that most times the answer, if you're being honest to yourself, is going to say no. It's going to be no. Swap your clothing with other people. You feel like you need something new because what you own doesn't truly speak about yourself anymore and the person you've become. Call up a friend of yours and see if maybe something that you've loved and that you've owned for some time might serve them better than it serves you today, and vice versa. One of the things that it was really important to us was showcasing the problem in each of the countries, but also end up trying to provide a solution, or at least a first step that people could take, so that you just didn't feel like, oh my God, like, this world sucks, like, but hey, what am I gonna do about it? So one of the things that we're really proud of to support is this campaign called Good Clothes Fair Pay, which was initially launched by The Guardian together with a bunch of other organizations that is looking to change regulation in Europe through an instrument called an ECI. So basically it's trying to promote through citizens' initiatives new laws on workers' rights, and basically what we're able to import in Europe that respects workers' rights internationally. I've never wanted to have anything to do with fashion, but I was never about fashion. I never followed it. I never cared about it. And so if I were to see that a docu-series like the one we just made had come out, I wouldn't care to watch it because I would feel like it has nothing to do with me, and there's nothing interesting that I might learn from it. And I couldn't be more wrong, because despite Junk being a docu-series about the impact of fast fashion and fashion as a whole on the planet and its people, it's something that has to do with all of us. Whether we love fashion or not, we still have to, wear clothes every day. We still have to live on this planet. We still have to drink water or eat food. And you won't believe it, but all of these things are impacted by how we produce our textiles and what we wear. Whether this is something that interests you, or that you're making your career, or it's something that you hate, despise, and would never want to learn about, trust me, if you watch Junk, you will learn a bunch of things that will be helpful for your everyday life. if you're based in Italy, you can now watch the show on Sky, the TV network, on Now TV, or on YouTube for free. And if you're living in Europe or internationally, either get yourself a VPN and a Duolingo account to learn Italian, or just wait a few months and it will be out for everyone in English to watch on YouTube as well.